Session 62. Good evening. A more or less intimate rapport between you helps you both whenever outside difficult situations arise. You are able to draw upon more constructive energy when such rapport exists. This is true in any case, that is, either one involving you, Joseph, or involving Rupert, and the difference between the energies that you tap when you are in rapport with each other and when you are not is immeasurable. I can state this in no stronger terms. Communications must always be maintained clearly. I suggest, but merely suggest, that Rupert hold even. Again, patience is not one of his characteristics. I will not dwell upon this matter any longer. Your cocktail party, however, I found immensely amusing, and at a later date, I may give you some reasons for its rather explosive nature. Ron said, don't forget. They said, all in all, it is just as well that the relationship between Rupert and Miss East matters be terminated. Rupert's and your idea of bidding her goodbye is necessarily a good one. By this time, you should know that all mature-on-mature is excellent. I mentioned earlier that very little distortion occurs in such material. There is very much to be covered. It goes without saying then, that there is consciousness of a kind, conscious energy, behind and to some extent within all material. Energy as it comes through your plane is individualized, and indeed, irregardless of any other theories, all energy contains some consciousness, in simple or more complicated Gestalt fashion, as I have mentioned, that atoms and molecules so possess a limited consciousness, and a generalized subconsciousness which contains within it a capsule comprehension of the universe as a whole. This will help you when we begin to speak of the patterns or shapes into which energy flows, and so maintains its appearance of performance and relative rigidity. This will be somewhat difficult in the beginning, and yet it is quite understandable. As energy flows through your field and appears within it, it does so according to its own inherent nature. This nature of energy, believe it or not, includes individualization and consciousness. Therefore, if you will for a moment think of bits of energy or consciousness, initially without definite form, entering your physical plane, then, according to the innate strength and the capacity of any given particle, it will, on entering your plane, on its own subconscious level already know how small or large a physical pattern it can form. This is at our simplest and most basic level. The forms then built, one within or upon the other, in the manner in which I explained that the gestalt of a human body was maintained. In many ways, like does attract like. Certain patterns, therefore, being set up, are used by other energy bits of similar capacity and strength. I have explained somewhat earlier how the gestalt ego consciousness was formed, and to some degree explained its psychic composition. But there is much more to be said here. There is a steady and unwavering cooperation that exists, and it is the basis of your physical universe. You do not see this cooperation. Your senses are rather more equipped to notice difference and divergence than sameness. But nevertheless, the cooperation of all conscious entities provides physical objects with whatever appearance of permanence they have. Your cat and the birds on your rooftop all do their part. With expanded consciousness, the responsibility for cooperation becomes more definite, and yet there is really no choice, for upon your physical plane, there will be cooperation or annihilation. I suggest you break. This cooperation is a necessity on a molecular level and continues through all phases of physical existence. Remember, however, that it is the conscious cooperation of the individualized energy that makes the molecule itself possible. As you know, so-called inert objects possess consciousness also, though in a more generalized and much less specific manner, in which to a large degree choice is denied to them. It should be apparent that psychic identity is no more dependent upon physical permanence. Certainly, when you consider that even a chair retains its form as a chair, even though it is actually not one thing or object, and that no atom or molecule remains the same within it. When you maintain that identity is dependent upon the duration of the physical body, you are taking it for granted that the physical body is one complete thing, more or less rigid in form and permanent within a certain perspective. You know, however, that the physical body is not one thing in those terms, and that the stuff of which it is composed is forever coming and going, arriving and departing, and yet identity is maintained. The limits of identity are arbitrary on your part, developed throughout the stages of your evolutionary process, not for any reason inherent in identity itself, but merely for purely practical reasons on your physical field, having to do with the amount of matter that various kinds of identities could effectively manipulate and control. In some ways, it may be said truly that the physical universe itself puts a limit on the extension of personal identity, and we will go into this also later. I have mentioned, for example, what you may think of as infinite building blocks or pyramids of comprehension, and these could not operate within your physical universe, as the basic gestalt freedom is severely limited. This is also one of the reasons why whole entities, as whole entities, do not exist in your field, but only separate, partially disconnected portions. Other fields do allow for greater complexity of psychic organization, and let me remind you again that such psychic organizations do not involve a blurring of individuality in some undefinable whole. As, for example, any drawing of consciousness in some gigantic, benign superconsciousness, this is not the point. You may not be aware of the conscious nature of each atom in your body, or of the gestalt consciousness formed by those atoms as they build into cells, but it is not necessary for them, or for their own awareness of themselves, that you give them that recognition. The consciousness in the cells exists whether or not you recognize it. Another inherent ability of energy is its own innate recognition of potential form. This is seen in the innate comprehension existing in the fetus. No one atom or molecule within the fetus will exist within the adult, and yet the bits of energy that have formed together to form the pattern of the fetus know the capacity and limits of their own nature, and know therefore the potentialities and limits of the pattern which they have made. They follow the law of body fulfillment, which on your plane is thought of as growth, but the growth, so-called, is not of itself a property of matter, in that the same matter does not grow, but energy completely forms the pattern ever anew, as far as the particular strength of the energy itself can carry it. and knowing the limitations and the capacities of the pattern which it has formed. To some extent, the image or physical pattern ultimately blurs. I suggest you break. It must be apparent, however, that all energy is not materialized as it passes through your field. They are also psychic crystals with intelligence that are not materialized on your physical plane, and with these you are not, of course, familiar. You had better forget the habit of thinking of your physical universe as a place, for it is simply not a place. Locations of this sort mean nothing. Even space, as you think of it, does not exist. Fifth-dimensional space is something else again. Appearance of space is a distortion of your own perception, and that is all. What your senses show to be empty, you turn space, and you think of matter, rather paradoxically, as filling up space, and yet as being where space is not. So-called space and so-called material are energy, and the true properties of energy are very difficult to explain to you, because all your concepts are so limited. You must think in terms of something being or not being, and this will get you nowhere. Everything that is, whether or not you can perceive it. You are equipped, however, to perceive far more than you do, through use of the inner senses. Incidentally, in the same manner that psychological experience exists, and does not take up space, in this same manner do psychic crystals of intelligence exist, more or less within your plane and yet not visible to your senses. They have some limited effect on your plane, however, but this is part of another discussion. Also, for reasons that I will for now withhold, the psychic patterns within your physical universe are not maintained, as you know, indefinitely. As far as I know, no crystal of any kind remains the same. But psychic crystals developed in terms of fulfillment, and it is known at the first appearance of a physical pattern how long the particular to be built up crystal will be maintained. Energy itself is continually new, event, and motion, and no particular pattern will surface it for long. Energy is self-renewing, and indefinite duration of pattern would lead to dead ends. Energy always builds. Identity, again, is not dependent upon matter. Energy propels and carries along with it its own transit. Identity, being independent of matter, is then not finished when the particular physical pattern is no longer created. Energy, while being propulsive, is also retentive. It retains what you may call memory of previous gestures. Causal comprehension exists even in the smallest particle of energy, and even within the smallest particle of energy, there exist all possibilities of development and creation. A psychic gestalt is dependent upon matter, not for its identity, but merely for its survival in the physical plane. Psychic gestalts or identities or individualities are for all practical purposes immortal. They may join other gestalts, but they will never be less than they once were. Identity, then, is never broken down. Any apparent breaking down is never an actual fact, as the personality could be thought of as a breaking down of the entity. But this is not so. The personality did not exist as such before its creation by the entity, and once it becomes an entity, it retains that individuality. Earlier, it was merely a possibility, as for example, a painting that you may paint next year is now only a possibility. I am endeavoring to end our sessions, for a while at least, at an earlier hour for several reasons, which will not concern you, and I will hear end the session, I should imagine, with your approval. You have little idea, apparently, of the feat in which we are herein involved. I have been ending the sessions earlier for a time merely to protect your interests. We have been working with difficult material. Robert's energy has recuperated in the main, and I hope that by next spring he will have learned to handle the spring months with more efficiency. Nevertheless, I am not only thinking of Robert, but also I wanted to give you some red Joseph in typing the material, and I was concerned with giving you more time to assimilate material as you get it. I did not realize that you would become so concerned. I am indeed flattered. There is a delicate balance here of spontaneity and discipline, and I try to keep the sessions fluent, disciplined, and yet also to give them life through spontaneity. I do want you to have some breathing space also. And now, after this brief explanation, I hope that you will look forward to our Wednesday session.